And you see, the cultural problem is such that now when I become elected, because I had that understanding that I can't question anybody in authority, when somebody questions me, I'm offended. So even in normal, everyday life, a policeman stops you. They want to check your license. You ask him, oh, is there a reason you stopped me? Say, my friend, get down. And I'm like, like in America, when a policeman stops you, he tells you, I think you're going over the speed limit. That is why I stopped you. Or we are doing this as part of a routine check. It's just basic human decency and etiquette. Yeah. But in Ghana, when you question a police officer, until you tell him, oh, I'm a lawyer. We are together in this. That type of thing. They only respect you based on if they think you are higher placed than them in society.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Shaft podcast. Today we present to you another episode of the Shaft Conversations, where we provide intellectually stimulating discussions on key issues that bring a more in-depth perspective to subjects that concern you. Today's guest is a personal friend of mine and a former debate partner. Joel Telfer Jr. is a lawyer and a law lecturer, and today we are going to be having important discussions on the law and how it interacts with you. First of all, welcome to the podcast, Joel.
Thank you, Erasmus. I'm happy to be here, and I just want to say I knew Erasmus before he became Mali. I knew him when he was Mauli, so I'm very excited to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I would want to give the viewers some context on who you are, where you began, but I would first of all like to point out how do you feel about, after so many years training in Continental Hall as a debater, and now popping up on a place like here, and you've been doing a lot of great things too out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about those sessions really, in that small room at Unity Hall in Kenya University, where we first met actually, and we were training to represent the hall for the Nooks Inter-Hall debate competition. And I'd say some of those sessions have shaped me to a large extent. I give a lot of credit to the likes of Wache, who was on your podcast a while ago, who was very instrumental. In fact, the story is, I was not originally part of the team that was supposed to represent Unity Hall. So one time, Wachi came up to my room and said, I've heard about you, so I think you should join us. And so when I came for the first session, when you're coming from high school, the dramatics that comes in debates. And I did all of those dramatics thinking, I'd aced it. And at the end of the debate, he told me, like, you've missed the point. and so that was a big reality check. But I reflect on those moments and many other debate training programs and debate competitions that we had the opportunity to attend and participate and win some, I must say. And it's exciting for me that after many years, we are turning a corner, and by the grace of God, we're able to put some of those things that we learned in the debate room into practice.
Yeah, I mean that's brilliant. I even want to zone in and talk about your practice now as a lawyer. I think it will be very interesting for the viewers to get a perspective of what your journey was. Like, where did the interest develop? How did it show up? And then how were you able to develop it to the point at which you are now? Yeah,
so mine is not a straightforward story. I didn't set out to become a lawyer. People who know me know that when I was growing up, the interest was always to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, which is very weird because...
Is it Dr. Frimpong?
Dr. Frimpong Boateng, exactly. That man has caused a lot of trouble. Yes. No, because when I was growing up, my dad and my grandmother always used to make me read newspapers. And that also explains my interest in politics. And so one day I took a newspaper and I saw a very big word, cardiothoracic surgeon. I said, wow, this is definitely something I want to be. And that was Professor Frimpong Boateng's picture with his title under. At the time, he was the director in charge of the heart center at College. And so I went to my dad and said, look, I think I want to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. He said, are you sure you know what that is? I said, I don't know, but whatever it is, exactly. And so that began my path to becoming a doctor, which I thought I wanted to be. And so right after, obviously, if you want to be a doctor, you have to go to high school and do science. I did well with my BC, so I got the chance to go to Infantsum School. The only school in Ghana, which I'm very proud of. And then when I got to Infantsum, I guess that is where reality began to hit me that science was, not my thing. So I'll be honest with you when I say I struggled in advancement. I would explain why I became a law lecturer as a result of that. But I struggled in advancement just because I just couldn't grasp the science concepts the way my colleagues would grasp. And I was thrust into Science 1, which is the elite of the elite. Yeah. So advancement had this thing where they put the best students who performed at the BEC according to the classes. So I was put in Science 1 and all the sharks were in Science 1. I remember the time the overall best BEC candidate was in my class.
Oh, really?
And these were people that we were supposed to be competing with. So it was quite difficult. But in advancement, I generated an interest in debate, in writing. So I was part of the Cooperative Bars, which was sort of like the news group for campus. I was part of the Writers and Debaters Club. And, but I found my way. I left in France when I ended up in tech. And when I went to tech, I pursued a degree in meteorology and climate science. Yeah. And that was also a very difficult experience. But then when I got to tech, arising out of debate and just my interactions, I would hear comments like, "Oh, the way you speak so well, I think you should become a lawyer." Yeah. It had never really dawned on me that potential. But I think somewhere in my second year, I began to flirt with the idea of being a lawyer. And I even considered, repeating the year just so I could change my course. But eventually I decided, I'll just finish KNUST and then see what life has to offer. So I finished KNUST. So right in final year, I knew that I was going to pursue a law degree as my second option. And then after my national service, I decided to go to GIMPA for law school. And then I did GIMPA Law School for 3 years, and then I got entry into the Ghana School of Law. Yeah. And then I got called to the bar. And so it has not been a very straightforward journey, but I think my journey has also made me appreciate, first of all, what it's like to be in a classroom where you don't understand what is going on. Because for large parts of my science education, I had no idea, and I just had to sit in class and pretend I knew what was happening. So when I interact with students and I interact with people who face similar challenges with the law, I sort of understand that type of experience. And that's what ultimately makes me want to help. Because I've come to understand that sometimes a person can have, it's not that people are dumb, just that they don't have a passion for that particular thing. So they don't even have the necessary tools they need to thrive. So that has always been my focus, and really that is what has culminated into my journey. So currently I'm practicing as a lawyer. My areas of interest really revolve around financial institutions and capital markets, how banking and finance, and generally how we can use capital to help businesses grow. So I'm particular about helping businesses grow, the tools available to them, and how we can bring financing to their doorstep. So that's what I'm focusing on currently.
That's super interesting, because we'll definitely get to the finance chat. Yeah. And I do remember seeing from the timeline also that you were awarded the best student in...
Yes, I didn't want to brag, but hey.
No, that needs to come out so that like it's an authority when you're saying stuff.
Yeah, when I was in law school, I had the privilege of being awarded the best students in company and commercial practice. The privilege, yes. It's a rare privilege that not many people have had. So I'm blessed to have had that privilege. But it's also, incidentally, my Master of Laws is in corporate and commercial law. And so it was a surprise for me. I pursued my master's while I was in law school as well. So it was a surprise for me when I got that award, because then it just solidified my sort of interest in that space. And that is what I've tried to go into in my practice. So my areas, and even as a lecturer, I teach predominantly in commercial law. So my areas of practice really just focus on corporate and commercial law.
No, that's super interesting. I think within your story also, I see a very clear example of where debate was able to bring out something in you and help you develop it and become that specific type of thing. And I think it's a story of this podcast, if we would say. We want to show people that debate just has the ability of influencing your level of thinking and the wavelength at which you can think and your perspective you can bring on some of these issues.
Yeah, the point I just add to that is, when I got into debate, it really changed my perspective and my worldview on a lot of things. Because now you are reading more. Now you are curious about things that ordinarily you would not have been interested in. Now you are learning to pace yourself when you speak. Now you are learning to speak to be understood, because you're trying to convince people. And so generally the exposure, first of all, the exposure that debate gives you and the opportunities that it opens you up to, and just generally how it improves your worldview, your perspectives, and the way you think. I give a lot of credit to debate in that respect, and I encourage a lot of people and everybody watching this podcast to take advantage of the many opportunities that debate presents.
Yeah, that's excellent. I want to put that question also back into the law, do you think getting to become a lawyer and studying the law has had some kind of benefits? I mean, obviously, like you as your profession and you're earning from it, so that's the big benefit.
Yeah.
But if an average person was to say, do I need to study law? Would it improve me as a person? Is that something that you would affirm to, and are there specific things that you'd seek to point out?
So my view is that there has to be some basic law for everybody. I think that we'll be better off as a society if we democratize the law and to the extent that people have a certain basic understanding, first, of their rights, their fundamental human rights. That's very important. And second, just a general understanding of the fact that the law is in place to serve society, and that we shouldn't allow the law to be used as a tool for intimidation. That's a foundational understanding. As to whether you need to study the law, I don't think everybody needs to be in law. And it is not out of, a survivor. No, it is not me trying to say not everybody should come and study law. It's just a thing of, I think that oftentimes you run the risk, and these days the law has become, there was a time where we had the MBA craze, where everybody in Ghana wanted an MBA. These days is the law, and everybody in Ghana wants a law degree. And the danger is that once you don't have the passion commensurate with that, intention to study the law, you'll struggle. And so you get into law school and then you are facing difficulties. But it's because it's just another, educational degree that you wanted, you're not applying yourself to the fullest extent. So the thing is, when people tell me they want to study law, I ask them, are you ready to do the long suffering? Because the law, people think it's just, I just need to read. It's English. I'll read and understand. But it's just a lot more than that. You have to apply yourself. So if you have the ability to apply yourself, that's fine. You can get the best outcomes from the law. There are people that have gone through law school and are lawyers now, but they still do not, have the the weight of what it means, and they can't hold their own. So it depends on the type of lawyer that you want to be. If you just want it as part of your qualifications, that's fine. But if it's something that you're truly invested in and want to, make a proper impact in terms of the profession, I encourage you. I think it's a good thing, and I think that you should find good law schools, apply to those law schools, and attend those law schools. But if it's just generally, you want a firmer understanding of your rights, I think there are other means, and there are less stressful means you can adopt, as opposed to putting yourself through at least 5 years. The shortest time a person can become a lawyer in Ghana is 5 years. Wow. And that is a lot of, as we'll come to, I'm sure, in the conversation, a lot of trials and tribulations. So I wonder if anybody would just want to pick that up for nothing at all.
Well, people are picking it up, certainly. I just even wanted to zero in on that, on the challenges. So obviously, we'll discuss it broadly, what it means to be able to access these things. But there are people who claim that the difficulties in succeeding to become, or the difficulties in going through the process to become a lawyer, is not just internal. It's largely external. The problems you mentioned does exist, but people said 90% of it is as a result of the way the system is designed to just push out students, to just limit the access to them. Do you think that is the case, or do you think that is maybe a wrong assessment of the entire situation?
So, I was looking at a meme last week that said that law school everywhere is meant to frustrate you. So if you look across the board, everywhere across the world, everybody who has become a lawyer or has been through law schools will tell you that the way in which law schools are set up, they will test your mental health. So I don't think it's a problem that is unique to the Ghanaian context. I'll be the first to admit that we have challenges with our legal education, our legal system. Maybe the time has come for us to look at reforms in the way in which it's done. Is there a deliberate attempt to prevent people from becoming lawyers? I do not think that's the case. I do think that there are structural issues that have produced that consequence, such that because there are structural defects, these defects are, they permeate every sphere of the Ghanaian society. It's not just unique to the law profession. The total breakdown in our functioning as a societal system is what has also, seeped into the legal profession as well. So, yes, we need to take stock of some of the challenges that we are facing and look to improve them. But I do not think that, or I do not subscribe to the idea that there's a grand scheme to prevent people from becoming lawyers. That I do not. I also think that the danger that we are facing now is there are people who are also looking to cut corners. And so there's also that perception, which may not, it may not be scientific, but there's that perception amongst those who are currently in the profession that the new crop of lawyers that are coming are not of a certain quality. And so, then what's the point? I don't think that has any scientific basis. the increase in the number of people that want to study law is also direct. That can also be linked to our population increase. Yes. I mean, when we were just 10 million people and we had only 100 lawyers, that's fine. But now we are about 4 million people living in Accra, and we still don't even have enough lawyers, despite the number of lawyers that keep coming out. So both sides of the coin, we need to look at the motivation to study law in the first place, admittedly. But we also have to admit that there are structural problems and issues with the legal education in Ghana that we must all be willing to sit down and admit and take stock on how we can improve it. But just to wrap up on this point, to put it out there, the study of the law is not easy anywhere in the world. Okay. So to assume that it is only hard in Ghana will be problematic. Those who are qualified elsewhere will tell you that it's also difficult there. But maybe we can take steps to ensure that even in the difficulty, there's a certain sense of objectivity. Because when people think that even though this is difficult, when I give it my best, I will come out, successfully.
It's fair.
It's fair. It's an objective means of assessment, then that's fair. When we reduce the level of, human manipulation and control, then people have more confidence in the system, and that will help things.
No, I think you make a valid point here. Not a lot of people make that point, that the law itself is a component of the system. So if the entire system we are dealing with in Ghana is one which is just not ideal, the expectation or holding the law to a certain standard would be unfair in the way in which it is framed. I think that's very powerful. But I think you also do mention question of access. For example, there are 4 million people in Accra alone, and there are not enough lawyers. Whenever I've had discussions with lawyers, they do not stop to point to the scarcity of lawyers in other regions of Ghana, especially in rural areas, and why there is a need for the law to be there. If I was to call any person on the street and say that there needs to be a lawyer in, I don't know, Gomoa, Fete, everywhere, people won't be able to conceptualize it. Yeah. Why do we need lawyers in our community?
Yeah. So I'll answer this question on two levels. Firstly, the challenge also is that even though we are producing more lawyers, the rural areas may never actually get lawyers because, firstly, there's a certain standard that lawyers hold themselves to. And so maybe these rural areas may not be able to afford. That's why we need things like expanding the legal aid scheme, such that if the government takes on the responsibility of paying these lawyers, and these lawyers are able to go to these communities and provide legal representation, then that helps. But then back to the central question of why do we need lawyers in every nook and cranny of this country, is that, first of all, we need to understand that in every society that is defined by the rule of law, there will be instances where people may have brushes with the law. Yes. And when they have brushes with the law, they require representation. If in those areas, and you see, it will interest you to note that almost every corner of this country now has a district court. That means that when you commit, let's say, a minor offense, you'll be put before a court. Yeah. And when you're put before a court, you are entitled to representation. It's a constitutional right. Yeah. And so if there are no lawyers in those areas, we have instances where people just are not aware of their rights, and then sentences are handed down. They end up in prison, and they had no representation at all. And they may not even have been guilty of the crime in the first place. Yeah. The second reason why we need lawyers is in the private aspect of things, is that now as an increasingly digitized society, people are becoming more aware of what they are entitled to, how they can order their affairs. And so ordinarily in the olden days, a Makola market one who wanted to sell on a large scale to another person, they didn't find the need for a contract. Yeah. They just understood that, let me just tell this person that I'll sell one plastic chair for 10 cedis. If the person defaults on the contract, what happens? I sold it to him, he didn't pay, I give it to God. That type of thing. And so those are instances where lawyers come in. And then really the very big issue we have also is instances of when people die without a will, intestate succession. We have instances where you may have seen in Nigerian movies and some local movies on how they maltreat, the spouse of the deceased person and their children just because the family has control over the assets. Yeah. And so you need lawyers, especially in these rural areas that don't have access to education, to help them understand the full scope of their rights. And in instances where people have taken them for a ride or people have been unfair to them, they can, necessarily take steps to bring actions to remedy those wrongs. A good example I'll give you is, now what we are seeing is across the country, there are these small microfinance institutions that are providing loans to these people. Yeah. And they are providing loans at outrageous interest rates. Yeah. And when they have provided those loans, they ask you to present some form of collateral And even when the loan, the period for repayment is not due, they want to repossess the collateral, they want to harass you to pay back the monies. And in some instances, some of these financial institutions are not even regulated. And so they are conducting activity in the night of day, under the covers of the night. And then when it's time to take back the money, they want to embarrass you in front of everybody.
I've seen the videos.
Yes, and so you've seen videos of people crying, just because they can't repay monies and stuff like that. It's because people don't even have access to lawyers, and they don't even see the need for lawyers. And so when you are, I know sometimes maybe you think, oh, I'm going to give my money to a lawyer. What's the point? Yeah. But for every document that you sign, especially once it involves a contract, it has an implication. Yes. And there are remedies and there are sort of like obligations that accrue to you. And so once you have access to lawyers in that sense, and truly my hope is that we could have a country where anybody who wants a lawyer can have access to a lawyer, even if they can't afford it, because the government is providing some form of legal aid, then they can have access to those lawyers, and then lawyers can help them order their affairs. That is the only way where we can strive to achieve a fair and equitable society, when people know that when they do wrong, there'll be somebody there to check them.
I really like the examples you gave, because these are very, very relatable things. These are things that, like, people who are watching this podcast saw their families go through. And the implications of these things are enormous. It's life-changing. And it defines how class is even created within these specific societies. Because you have people who, like you said, are going to prison for next to no reason at all, wasting their lives in there. People who spend a lot of money going from one police station to another, giving money to policemen in order to be able to have some form of justice. And we are now living in a country where people just think justice is not accessible. So the number one rule is to stay away from all institutions or any incidents which is likely going to bring you in that fray. So most people's, especially for families, their reaction is, if you fall into trouble, we don't want anything to do with you. Like, you are the bad man.
You're on your own.
You're on your own. Even without trying to justify whether is the person right to do what they would want to do or not. I think the question I would like to ask at the tail end of this is, because you do mention legal aid, is there a principal case for it? Because if you look at the citizens' connection to the state, there is a social contract which is signed. And if that interaction with the state requires some mediation, is that mediation then obligatory to the states to try and provide it?
Absolutely. I think that in a nation state such as ours, where I think it is even more prevalent in poorer societies, where more people do not even have access to these type of resources that they need. And so it is mandatory, I dare say, for the state to put in place mechanisms to ensure that people that require access to some sort of legal assistance get it. And you see, when we say legal assistance, it's not necessarily that the lawyer should, do everything for the person. Sometimes it's just a basic conversation. Oh, lawyer, I want to take a loan from this person. The person says I should pay back, but the person told me I should pay back in 6 months. Now he says he wants to take the money back after a month. Lawyer, what can I do? That is just one simple conversation that will solve a huge problem for the person. And so I feel like, as a state, we need to be paying more attention to some of these issues, what we can do to ensure that people in the less privileged communities, and I like the point that you make, that it is something that goes to entrench the class systems that we have, because the rich in society can afford the best lawyers. The poor in society do not even have access to any lawyers. And so if we want to avoid situations where we are continuing to, alienate the middle class and entrench the difference between the rich and the poor, we need to ensure that as a nation state, we are taking responsibility and helping out and providing the resources that poor people need and giving them access to, like I've mentioned, because of the importance of legal representation, access to representation. Because, if you go to some prisons, right, you would find a litany of persons that are there simply on account of offenses that they should not have been convicted on in the first place. And even if they should have been convicted on, it should have been for some community, work service or something like that. But they are serving custodial sentence, hard, and these are people that will come out hardened criminals, because there are all sorts of bad habits they pick up in the prisons and stuff like that. So as a state, we need to evaluate the overarching need for lawyers in these places to help people, to provide that representation that is required for people in order to ensure that we are achieving the gains of a democracy and ensuring fairness and equality for all persons.
I really like that. I don't want to dwell within this area because there's still a lot of things we need to talk about, but I can't go without talking about the apprehension that people within our local community, and I'm not even saying poor people or uneducated people,
even
educated people, the apprehension they have towards lawyers.
Yeah.
If you and them have an issue, or it's even sometimes in payment of a service, you're like, let me get my lawyer to write a contract. They are not going to have business. They are not going to do business with you.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, people saying, let's take the matter from the lawyers and let's bring it home to discuss.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you want to give a comment on this situation? Are there some instances where it is good? What is informing this apprehension, and how can we make it better?
So I'll take some responsibility for that on two levels. First of all, I think that sometimes we as lawyers appear to be small gods. And so we carry ourselves in a way that suggests that we are not approachable by the average Joe. So the average Joe who sells their wares in Makola would not, they think, hey, if I go and see a lawyer, I have to pay such a huge sum. So there's no point. If I can resolve it on my own, why wouldn't I do that? So on that level. The second level also is that, again, it goes back to the wider problem of education. So even we have, and I like to make this point, that we have an uneducated, educated population. Because even naturally, in relation, it's not just a problem with lawyers, even doctors. So you have, I'm sure you have colleagues, friends, who, when they have some symptoms, which it definitely calls for going to see a doctor. They'll be like, oh, I'll just go to a pharmacy, tell them it's malaria, and then just treat myself. And these days, the prevalence of people relying on herbal medicine and stuff like that. So people just don't generally see the need for professionals. They don't see why, for instance, a business you run, you want to do your books, you don't see why you need to hire an accountant or an auditor to do the financials for you. I'll do it myself. I know how to use Excel. So people don't value the premium that professionals bring. And so that is also the challenge. Because people don't place a value on it, when they even engage the professionals, they treat them flippantly. They'll be like, oh, lawyer, you're just drafting this 3-page contract and you want to charge this amount. Forgetting that the lawyer is applying years of knowledge and to put this down to ensure that you are avoiding a bigger penalty in the future or bigger implications. So I think on two levels, maybe we as lawyers need to do more to assure the populace that we are accessible. And then the people also need to respect professionals in a sense that they need to understand that when people are conducting business activity, it's the same way for instance, if I go into a shop and somebody's selling something for 100 cedis, and I told the person, but this thing, I'll buy it for 10 cedis, they will take offense. It's the same way they should also expect the lawyer to take offense when they try to undermine the value of the work that they are bringing on board. And so I think on both levels, we have something to do to bridge this gap in terms of the apprehension. And people also need to understand that. And truthfully, there are some issues that can be resolved without the involvement of lawyers. And even as a profession, these days we are encouraging alternative means of dispute resolution, where if the matter can be resolved without resort to a court or an arbitral tribunal, just try to encourage it. But there are some instances that are just not resolvable that way. But in those instances where can be resolved by two parties, just by virtue of community, you and a friend had a small dispute, you can resolve it. That's fine. But I would always say that it's always better to involve a lawyer because, especially when there are rights involved and there's money involved, friendships have gone sour because of money. So you don't want to take chances on that level. So on both levels, that's how we can approach it.
No, this is brilliant. I feel like we've already even covered so much. Just by looking at this aspect, and there's still like so much more to talk about, but we'll try. When you talk about the uneducated, educated, I think it's a very, very powerful way to frame, especially us as Ghanaians, right? Like the way in which we are educated or we are brought up. If you look at our educational system, there's an emphasis on repetition and your ability to be able to recall things, and the way in which what makes you intelligent is what kind of grades that you can get in school, amongst a number of things, and there's really not an effort to broaden our knowledge, even on some of the most basic stuff. And I think that becomes the stark difference between sometimes people who are here and people in the West. Even in debates, we experience it, right? Some of the concepts we're now learning for the first time, like principle of the states, the relationship between the states and the church, people knew them from infancy,
Yeah.
right? So I just wanted you to take us on a journey, because when you ask any Ghanaian about the law, the first place it starts from is the 1992 Constitution.
Yeah.
But I think that's as far as they know. How did this constitution come about? How do constitutions come about?
Yeah.
Because there are talks of things like revolutions are what begin constitutions.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the constitution is seen as the law. Is in Ghana, you don't break it, you don't speak against it. But we've had a couple of changes, right?
Yeah.
So do you want to take the opportunity to educate people on this topic of constitution states, how these states in themselves are formed, how these things in themselves are written, and then how they affect us?
Great. And I think it's a wonderful question you ask, because quite recently there have been some musings after the economic challenges that we had of a possible coup d'etat, and whether we as a nation state need to dispense with the 92 Constitution and perhaps be ruled by. I think that's absolute nonsense. We need to depart from that. But I'll come back to that shortly. So in terms of a constitution, so usually constitutions come about as a result of consensus. So a group of people as a result of the social contract, which I'm sure a lot of debaters who are watching this will be familiar with. It's one of the first things you learn. As a result of a social contract, the people decide that we want to, choose a group of leaders to, lead us, not lord over us, lead us. And then they need a framework within which to operate. Yeah. And so that understanding of the framework is what births a constitution. In Ghana's unique case, since gaining independence, in 1957 we had a constitution that was suspended, and we got the 1960 Republican Constitution. That is when we fully became a nation state. And then after the coup, we had the 69 Constitution. Then we had the 79 Constitution, and then PNDC came, and then we had the 92 Constitution. So anytime a revolution happens or a coup d'etat happens, the first thing they do is to suspend the Constitution, then they will dissolve the government. And this is because the Constitution places, or many good constitutions, they provide for what is known as constitutionalism, such that they provide an effective restraint on the exercise of governmental power. So there are procedural, substantive, hard safeguards that are provided in the Constitution, such that it doesn't matter who comes into office, there are just certain things you cannot do.
Yes.
And when that is antithetical to the principles of a military regime. So that is why they'll suspend the Constitution, because the Constitution, for instance, prescribes limits for the term of office. I mean, a military regime has no business with terms. So in terms of that, so in Ghana's unique case, the 92 Constitution, if you look at it critically, is just a reflection of all the previous constitutions that we've had. And you would see provisions in there that originated as far back as 1969. What the committee of experts that put together the proposals for the draft constitution sought to do was not necessarily reinvent the wheel entirely, because they had a certain understanding of how the nation state had been operating over time. And so they put together a constitution that reflected Ghana's journey, but also sought to speak to where Ghana was going. And that is what the 1992 Constitution represents. As a document, it is the supreme law of the land. And any other law that is inconsistent with the Constitution, of course, to the extent of its inconsistency, will be held null and void. Now, growing up, there was this culture where all of us had constitutions.
Yes.
And NCC, I remember growing up, NCC did a conscious job, small booklet of distributing. I don't think it's as and I think that is problematic, because I think every Ghanaian who has had the opportunity to go to school should have a sort of relationship with the Constitution, because that is the only way with which we can demand accountability from our leaders. Because many of the problems that people talk about, I see on social media, Twitter, that means our Constitution is defective, is because they don't understand the Constitution as a document. And you see, and it's only so far that the Constitution can go. It can provide all the rules. But if the people themselves do not appreciate the powers granted them by the Constitution, will not be able to take advantage of the full extent of the provisions of the Constitution. I'll give you a classic example. Now, for a long time, after the 1992 Constitution came into force, the Constitution guaranteed the freedom of assembly and the right to participate in peaceful demonstrations and protests. But the understanding was that you needed a permit from the police before you could embark on a demonstration, which was absurd. If the Constitution has guaranteed your right to do something, why do you need permission from somebody? There's no additional requirement. So, for instance, you have a right to life. You do not need permission from anybody to live. You have a right to own personal property. You do not need permission from anybody. And again, there's this understanding that, of course, rights are not absolute. They are subject to certain limitations. But those limitations must not defeat the very purpose of the right. So if somebody could whimsically deny you from participating in the demonstration, then why do we guarantee you the right or the freedom to participate in that demonstration? And so just about 95, 96, one of the political parties decided to bring an action in the Supreme Court to challenge the law that required the police permit. And even up to now, people do not know that when you are going on a demonstration, you do not require the permission of the police.
The chatter with recent ones where police keep on questioning.
Exactly. So what I think I just need to clarify for the purpose of education. What it is that you inform the police that on such a date you intend to go on a demonstration. If the police think that you're going on a demonstration with disruptive to the public peace, blah, 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 they have to apply to the High Court for an order to prevent you from going on the demonstration. It doesn't lie in the mouth of the police to say that we won't let you go on the demonstration.
What?
Yes. And so it just goes back to make my point that because people do not understand the Constitution, they think that the Constitution is set up against them. So if we have a group of young people who are, protest hungry, they'll say, oh, the 1992 Constitution itself does not encourage protest because we've been told that if you want to go on a protest, you need the permission of the police. And so I think that going forward, we need to go back to those cultures, or that particular culture and the ethos that we had, where people were more aware of the provisions of the Constitution and they were more understanding of it. Of course, you will not understand the technicalities of some of the provisions in there, but some of them are so basic for anybody to understand. That, for instance, if government wants to acquire your land compulsorily, they must do so by paying you compensation. That is something that anybody can understand, such that if government decides to exercise its right of eminent domain over your land and they've not paid compensation, you know something wrong has been done. So unless we also go back to the system of consciously educating people on the provisions, especially, and I'm very particular about the fundamental human rights that exist in the Constitution, we run the risk of people not even valuing the document that is the Constitution. So they always say, oh, it's just for the lawyers. It's just for the lawyers. But the Constitution is much as for the market woman, as is for the trotro driver, as is for everybody else. So I guess as a nation state, we slacked on that bit, and we need to go back to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had on the Constitution, but let me use this leeway to start asking about that, because you see a lot of people on TV who are asking, they are crying because government has destroyed their lands, has evicted them. People who are just mourning because the police said they can't go out to go and protest, amongst a number of things. What I want to point out in all those scenarios is the posture that we have as Ghanaians towards the state. It does look like, and I don't know if it comes from a place of culture where there's respect for older people, but it does look like we always subject ourselves to what the person in authority says instead of what the law should be. Exactly. And in fact, if you do demand that you be treated fairly on the basis of the law, people are going to say you are causing trouble, and therefore, like, why don't you just comply? They said don't go. Why are you going? And we have that sort of demeanor. Do you think it plays a role? Was the Constitution trying to reflect that in a way, or do you think it's bad habits which has just been built over time?
I've always said that the biggest problem we have as Ghanaian people is our culture, our cultural disposition, because we are taught not to question, like you said, question constituted authority. We are taught that if you speak about the things that matter to you, you are either tunu, and we are taught that when some ill befalls you as a result of speaking up, you deserve it. So I remember last year when some protesters were arrested during the Occupy Jilobi House protest, they said, oh, they told them not to go and they went and they've been arrested. So, why are they complaining? So that's the challenge, really, is that we are told not to question anything. And that when somebody in authority has said, this is it, and you see, the Constitution departed from those principles. And the Constitution, if you like, reflected, so if you look at our human rights provisions, if you look at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, our Constitution mirrors those human rights provisions. So when it comes to our human rights provisions and some of the entitlements that Ghanaians have, it is not even a culture issue. It is an issue of understanding that these are rights that are inalienable. Once a person is born, they're entitled to them, and they should have access to those rights. And so when people do not understand those rights, that is when people in authority can dictate to them. I'll give you a classic example. When we enacted our Chieftaincy Act in 2008, we put a provision in there that said, Section 63D, that said that a chief could summon you to his palace at any time, and if you fail to attend a chief summons, you may even be liable to imprisonment. Why? Why should a chief have the power? A chief who is not a judicial officer, not elected. Even elected officials do not have the power to summon you.
Yeah.
And you may not even be, an indigent over where he lords over, but you are supposed to attend his call. Somebody went to a Supreme, incidentally was a chief. Nane Jampo who went to a Supreme Court and challenged. The Supreme Court, of course, your freedom of movements cannot be restricted just by virtue of the fact that a chief has summoned you.
Yes.
So even in instances, and this is guaranteed by the Constitution, so I'm showing you examples of where sometimes even our laws enacted by Parliament have appeared to, give excess powers to constitutional authority, and our Supreme Court has said, no, you can't do that. So for instance, another example, in 2020, when lockdown happened, we enacted the Imposition of Restrictions Act and said the president could at any time, when he deemed it necessary, even after lockdown had happened, even after coronavirus had gone, put the country into a state of, lockdown. And there was no sort of so that law was not restricted only to the coronavirus situation. It was a wide law. The Supreme Court said you can't do that because the Constitution does not permit those type of actions. So I know trust in the judicial system is at an all-time low, but our judiciary is still a force for good. And there are still instances where our judiciary continues to hold the people in the executive to account. And you see, the cultural problem is such that now when I become elected, because I had that understanding that I can't question anybody in authority, when somebody questions me, I'm offended. So even in normal, everyday life, a policeman stops you. They want to check your license. You ask him, oh, is there a reason you stopped me? Say, my friend, get down. And I'm like, in America, when a policeman stops you, he tells you, I think you're going over the speed limit. That is why I stopped you. Or we are doing this as part of a routine check. It's just basic human decency and etiquette. But in Ghana, when you question a police officer, until you tell him, oh, I'm a lawyer. We are together in this. That type of thing. They only respect you based on if they think you are higher placed than them in society. When they see you in Rasta, when they see you in some type of outfit and apparel, they already, talk you down. And so I think that it just goes back to the fact that we as a people need to be more conscious. And I like the new, generation of young people that are coming who are very exposed to the internet and seeing the power of protests elsewhere. In Kenya, we've seen what protests have done. Even in America, when the Black Lives Matter, movement had a lot of steam, we saw the power of protest. And many young people in Ghana are now beginning to appreciate their voices, the power of their voices, and understanding that we are putting an end to that system where because somebody is older than you, the person is automatically assumed to be smarter than you or know better than you. When the person is wrong. And there's an objective standard to determine who is wrong. The Constitution says what is permissible and what isn't. Our laws tell us what is permissible and what isn't. And when somebody has breached that, the only way you have to call the person out. And once you call the person out, you should not, suffer any punishment or any consequence as a result of that. So I'm happy with the way things are going. But I think that we also need to be guided and understand that we must do things in a certain context with the appreciation of the law. And if we don't appreciate our legal rights and the regime that exists to protect those rights, we'll always be making all of these, pedestrian comments. And, those are some of the challenges.
No, I think there's so much being shared here. I wish everyone would get to hear this episode. There were two things which was crossing my mind, and I don't know, you somehow find a way to answer both of them. But it does seem that awareness of the evolution, there's some kind of conversation that is not just happening on the surface level. There are far deeper conversations, especially things around the Constitution. The only time I hear people debating bills which are being passed in Parliament is when one political party is shouting about it. And we've missed the number of times that, I don't want to call it collusion, but when laws and bills are being pushed out where it benefits the ruling and political class without anyone speaking about it, the uneducation of the Ghanaian populace and the Ghanaian youth comes at the benefit of someone who is out there batting for us. It's not clear. And in this case, where the judiciary is doing it, but even for them, they still need to be held up to some level of scrutiny. So that's why your example, and that leads me to the second part, your example of the youth and some of these guys trying to go out on a protest. We saw in Kenya, we saw in Israel, for France is breakfast, where people challenge the regime. But the way in which this challenge is viewed over here, and I have a sensitive question also around where the lines between civil disobedience ends and it becomes an affront to the state where it's called treason, or you trying to push back against the state. And I'm introducing that because in more recent times, we've heard that word being used a lot. Where does the young person start from? Where do they start from?
Look, I'm a big believer in civil disobedience. Because I feel like the easiest way in which leaders tell us to hold them to account, if I don't perform, vote me out.
Yeah.
But in those 4 years, when you're not performing, what should we do? We should wait till the time is up for us to vote you out. No. And leaders in this country for too long have been too comfortable.
Yes.
We need a situation where people know that we are constantly watching them. We are holding them to a certain standard. And things such as protests, marches, these are things that draw attention to the issues. And so when people are protesting a particular issue and you're seeing it on TV, even if you are in Takrade or you are in, Sefi, and you're seeing it on TV, then it becomes a topical issue. Oh, some young Ghanaians are protesting in Accra because, they want to pass a new bill to do something. Yeah. And so how does that bill affect me? Yeah. Why are they even protesting in the first place? And we begin to have conversations, and we are we are shaping the narrative in that regard. Yes. So civil disobedience is very important. But you see, what I want people to appreciate, and I hope everybody listening takes this away, is that the only way you can protest is if we have a democracy. And so this obsession with an autocracy, a situation where the dissent will be stifled, is problematic. I don't think that, the solution that would have for all our challenges in this country is if one man comes and says, I've taken over the reins of power. No, absolutely not. Our systems need to be improved, but we also as a people need to continually hold our leaders to account. Yeah. When we do that, we get better outcomes. But the only way we can hold them to account, Erasmus, is that we have a democracy. There's no way we had the military regime, you and I will be sitting here having this podcast. Even if we would be, all we'll be saying is, God bless the regime, God bless the president, that type of thing. Because the next thing we know, somebody would have stormed into the studio and, clamped us down. And so if we appreciate the rights that we have, if we appreciate the fact that we can get onto X and say whatever that we think without fear of reprisal or without fear of any attack, then we also have to appreciate that that can also be a force for good. And that in that same system, where there are challenges, we can, improve the system from within. And so we need to disabuse our mind from this notion that the solution to Ghana's problem lies in a coup d'etat. It doesn't. And if you talk to people that have lived through military regimes, they will give you horror stories, harrowing experiences and accounts of some of the painful things that they had to endure. Some of them were just doing business. Some of them, were late by virtue of the curfew by 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Some people lost their lives. And so that is not a type of system that we want to encourage. But on the other side, too, our politicians need to realize, like what happens in France, like the French people protest as if it's their bread and butter. Like the same way they will protest over something as like bread. Yes. Anything, So we need to also have that culture where people know that, just like in Kenya, when politicians were going around wearing T-shirts, apologizing for, supporting, it doesn't need to transcend into violence. And I speak very strongly against violence. But when we protesting does two things. One, it draws attention. Two, it brings the conversation and narrative and ensures that people are aware of what is happening. So I think that, yes, civil disobedience, taking a more active role in our democracy is what is important. We cannot continue to just be on the sidelines and be like, the system will not change. The system will not change. The system will only change when we are interested. And like you said, there's a potential of those in the political class to always act in their best interest. Yes. But when the political class knows that the young people are watching, they are paying attention to their every move. And so you'd realize that some of the big decisions that have been or have attempted to be taken by government, as soon as a lot of people started talking about it, then government withdraws it. But when people are not interested, they just let it go. So I know sometimes it can be exhausting, but we have to constantly remind ourselves that in this system of governance, it has to be a continuous check. And we need to call out politicians when we think they've erred. And we need to also ensure that we don't hold politicians to the standards of gods. And there's just one point I just want to piggyback on because you mentioned the people that benefit the most from our lack of education are the politicians. Yes. Because if people are poor, they don't have access to education, they can't speak for themselves, they don't understand their rights. Politicians can always take advantage of that. Yes. They can spill lies, say all sorts of things. But once people have a good sense of their, who they are as people, and they have a good livelihood. So if you have a good means, good income, no politician can come and, throw 1,000 cedis in your face. And, so until we get to that point where politicians understand that they owe us a duty when they have gone into office, and not the other way around. They are not there for us to serve them. They are there to serve us. If they can't do it, they should get out of there. Until we get that understanding, then that is the only time that we progress as a society.
That's a lot to process. You do mention the trauma of the past, like with regards to the military dictatorships that you faced. There's just a question that popped in my mind, that are we responding to that trauma by being very submissive? Are we responding to that trauma where some people say, you know what, why are you going out onto the streets? Yeah, like we have mothers who prevent their children, cry and beg them because they don't want them to fall into trouble. Do you think it plays a role, and how can we win away from it?
Yeah, it absolutely does play a role, because you'd have instances where, for instance, if my grandmother was alive and I told her I was going for a protest, she would slap me. She would tell me, what are you doing? Because my uncle, was, beaten up by the military regime at the time, because he broke curfew. So any form of resistance to old people seems like a bad idea.
Yes.
And so, admittedly, yes, that is a trauma that we have. But we as young people, and I go back to young people all the time, increasingly, when we explain the issues to older people, they begin to see it the way that we see it. When we tell them that the reason we protest is because of A, B, C, and D, and that we do not operate at a regime where this is permissible or acceptable anymore, where I can show up to a protest and bad things will happen to me. And it goes back to also ensuring that the institutions of states are always held to account. Yeah. And so when the police have wrongfully arrested somebody and put the person behind bars, we should have instances where people, are taking the police up to account. Yes. And, questions are being asked when people are brutalized at demonstrations. That way, at least the old people know that even if in the unlikely event that something happens to you, there will be justice, there will be accountability for that. But we as young people need to, because we come from a different cloth and we came at a different time, we need to take it up and ensure that we are not only going onto the streets, but we are also even encouraging older people, helping them understand why protests are the way to go, why, talking about important things are the way to go, why not making it an election cycle, such that issues only become, you only remember that the street lights in your area do not work when the MP is coming for re-election. No, the first year after he has been elected, there's a municipal assembly. There are assemblymen. There are people that are elected and put in place to do these things. They are not doing those things. We should be having town hall meetings. It's very rare for a politician to, do a town hall where he's taking. It's very common. It's very common in the US. And, there are a number of politicians in Ghana who rarely do media interviews. They don't even avail themselves.
Don't even know some of
exactly.
them.
They rarely avail themselves to any form of public scrutiny. We need to change that, so that if any young person gets elected into office, he himself understands that if he goes to become like them, the fire that is coming for him is twice what he tried to met out. So say, for instance, I'm on this podcast saying all of these fanciful things, and I get elected as MP, then all of a sudden I am missing. That wouldn't make any sense. So because we need to, as we would say, we need to stand on business.
Yes.
We need to stand on the business of, reforming the type of thinking, so that we can get to a point where politicians understand that, look, we have a very aware Ghanaian populace. We have people that are willing to hold us to task, and ask us the important questions. Until we get to that point, and I'm very hopeful that we get to that point in our lifetime, that is when we can begin to see a change in the way in which politicians address us.
I do believe same, and I think that this podcast is one of the means by which we are looking to achieve that. Because someone will listen to you now, and hopefully that should kindle like a lot of fires in different people and begin to have some of these conversations in their circle. Like moving away from states, corporations. I've already revealed the names, but they are one entity that almost no one talks about. Quite recently, people have expressed harrowing concerns about corporate culture within Ghana, and even corporate governance, the way in which our corporations are set up and they interact within the financial markets, the way in which they treat their employees. People do not understand the relationship that they should have with them, and some of this authoritarian style thing continues to seep through and flow through it, where people are not being paid, not given pensions, not put on proper contracts. People don't even see contracts before they start working. Given it's your area, what have you seen within that space, and what are some of the reforms that you think we should start preparing to shape the sector?
It all starts, it goes back to the problems we have economically as a country. We have too many poor people. And so people are taking up jobs that they shouldn't even be taking up in the first place. And when they've taken those jobs, because there are so many people waiting for you to fail so that they'll come and take up those jobs, people put up with terrible conditions of service. And oftentimes they're not even aware that they have certain rights under the law that enables them to, have good working conditions, especially those who work in construction. Yes. You'd find that sometimes there are not enough tools for work. Sometimes they are put in, situations where they may even end up losing their lives. It's a sad thing for me, because even in the situation where we have a lot of people working in this country, many of them are, just working jobs that, they are barely surviving on, and they are being treated terribly. Goes back to the same authoritarian, problem that we have, where somebody is a CEO, so he thinks that, he can talk down on everybody in the business. If you question him, you are thrown out of the business. Ultimately, corporations or companies, entities, they are private entities. Yeah. And so the government can only do so much to regulate ways in which they conduct themselves. But we also have to ask ourselves the question of what even happens in public institutions, the way in which people in public institutions are treated. And you see that even in instances where people's jobs are guaranteed, they are still not treated in the best way possible. So there's a general, organizational culture problem that we have in various companies, entities across board. And honestly, I also think it goes back to the cultural problem. Unless we solve the cultural problem, we'll not solve that. But it also means that we as a people need to begin to look at ways in which we can make the work environment much more, suitable and conducive. So maybe we need to begin to explore instances where, there's some form of legislation by way of human resource practices that companies must subscribe to. The fact that you're employing people means that, and there are labor laws in terms of their paid leave and the maternity leave and those other things, but the enforcement is always a challenge. Yes. And so people don't even know that when you have a dispute with your employer, you have access to the National Labour Commission, which can grant you a remedy. But for fear of I may not have the job, and that's also the challenge. So unless we solve the economic problem first, the corporations will not behave accordingly. Secondly, people treat entities or companies like their private property. Admittedly, Erasmus, when you and I set up a company, it is our business. But the business now takes a life bigger than just you and me. And so because we have this understanding that the company is for us, we treat it just as we like. And so we'll go into the accounts of the company, withdraw money without checking the financial health and status of the company. We don't care if we've paid salaries and all of that. There's no conscious culture of sustaining the company because we think it's my business. If I decide I don't want to do business anymore, it doesn't matter. Until we get to the point where we realize that as soon as you incorporate a company and becomes, functional, it takes on a life of its own. Yeah. And the greater legacy is seeing that years after you have exited or you have died, your company still exists. Running. So you would see that we don't have that many companies in Ghana that succeed post the death of their founders or their initial shareholders. But in America, you see the biggest companies in corporations around the world, the biggest companies are always legacy companies. Yeah. So we need to also have that business. And I'm hoping that, institutions that are teaching business administration and people that will go into the world of business would have this intentional approach to ensuring that the business now becomes a legacy. Because there are so many beautiful businesses that existed in the 90s, growing up some of the businesses that we knew that we don't even hear about anymore because they died with the founders. And after the founders died, their children, fought a bit over the assets. They decided, let's liquidate and then let's move on. So I think as government, government needs to look to improving the macroeconomic conditions. That will then spill over to ensuring that people are living a better life and then companies are not taking them for granted. And after they've gone into these companies, we're ensuring that, there are instances where people can, make complaints about issues such as sexual harassment, ill treatment from their employers without any fear of attacks or reprisals, where we are guaranteeing protections for these people and ensuring that their access to, for example, the National Labour Commission is well known to them and they can take up the opportunities that are available to them to ensure that if the employer has acted in a way that, is offensive, then they can be brought to book. Yeah. The last thing I just want to, in terms of the pensions and taxes and,
very,
social
very
security, look, every Ghanaian who works in this country is entitled or must pay SNIT. Yeah. which is they must pay social security in terms of tier 1. The employer is also entitled to pay a certain portion for them. So if your employer is not paying your SNET, they are breaking the law.
It's
simple as that. What some employers have tried to do is they'll enter into what is known as a contract. So it's, instead of an employment contract, is a contract for services. So if it's a professional, for instance, so if I engage you as a lawyer, you are not entitled to pay my SNET because yes, a contract for service. I'm not your employee. So even though they are employees properly so called, they say, oh, you are a contract staff, so we are not entitled to pay all of these things. Unfortunately, it goes back to the unemployment problem. But ideally, you should walk away, because the truth is your social security is the only safety net you have post-retirement. And these days, even like, how much are we even earning in terms of social security? After 60, nobody wants to employ you. So that's what you can look to so that you don't become a burden on your children. And so you have to ensure that at every point in time, your employer is paying your SNET. At the very base, some organizations are lucky, the employers pay tier 2 and other, but at the very least, the basic one, that one is mandated by law. And SNET sometimes goes after some employers who don't pay. But you as an employee, you have to be constantly checking to make sure that your employer is paying your SNET and, saving, so that you're saving something towards your pension. Because sometimes they even deduct it from your salary.
But they don't
pay it. And then that's the challenge. So I think SNET has rolled out a comprehensive mechanism to check how much of your social security contribution. When you get your payslip, just check how much has been deducted and see if it is reflected in terms of the contributions. But it's mandatory. The law mandates it. You must pay.
So I think this represents a lot of the things which employees in themselves are not conscious of, which goes back to the awareness problem. But one thing I find within your answer is there's sort of a chicken and an egg situation here, where economic problems are breeding these kind of things. But at the same time, these kind of attitudes and lack of corporate governance or poor corporate governance structures is creating these economic problems, because we can't grow if we don't have companies who are also growing or who are doing some of the basic things. So what would we say is the way forward beyond an elaborate economic emancipation plan?
Okay. Just generally, first of all, we need, if you like, a reorientation in terms of our thinking of how we approach business and looking to expand the frontiers of business. I mean, last week I moderated a panel on the African Continental Free Trade Area. There are a lot of opportunities that the free trade area and just the new age, the digital age, provides for entities in Ghana. And basically now, if you want to do a business in Ghana, open a restaurant, open a pub. We're just doing the same things, expecting different results, thinking that, as for me, if I open my restaurant, I'll have the best chef. So, but there are many more like frontiers of business that we can go into and expand. And we could also look to expanding the market, right? It also comes from a problem of really financing. We don't have the sort of financing that we need to enable companies grow and scale up to the levels where they can. So, again, goes back to the macroeconomic issues, but not to derogate from the point. We need a new understanding of business. We need a new crop of business leaders who understand that there's so much more business can do. And like you said, even though the government has a role to play, strong businesses also boost the economy, because then you are paying, good amounts in corporate tax, you are employing a good amount of people, you are helping the government reduce its imports by, increasing exports and stuff like that. So there's so many things that you check how much of your social security contribution. When you get your payslip, just check how much has been deducted and see if it is reflected in terms of the contributions. But it's mandatory. The law mandates it. You must pay.
So I think this represents a lot of the things which employees in themselves are not conscious of, which goes back to the awareness problem. But one thing I find within your answer is there's sort of a chicken and an egg situation here, where economic problems are breeding these kind of things. But at the same time, these kind of attitudes and lack of corporate governance or poor corporate governance structures is creating these economic problems, because we can't grow if we don't have companies who are also growing or who are doing some of the basic things. So what would we say is the way forward beyond an elaborate economic emancipation plan?
Okay. Just generally, first of all, we need, if you like, a reorientation in terms of our thinking of how we approach business and looking to expand the frontiers of business. I mean, last week I moderated a panel on the African Continental Free Trade Area. There are a lot of opportunities that the free trade area and just the new age, the digital age, provides for entities in Ghana. And basically now if you want to do a business in Ghana, open a restaurant, open a pub. We're just doing the same things, expecting different results, thinking that, as for me, if I open my restaurant, I'll have the best chef. So, but there are many more like frontiers of business that we can go into and expand. And we could also look to expanding the market, right? It also comes from a problem of really financing. We don't have the sort of financing that we need to enable companies grow and scale up to the levels where they can. So, again, goes back to the macroeconomic issues, but not to derogate from the point. We need a new understanding of business.
Yes.
We need a new crop of business leaders who understand that there's so much more business can do.
Yeah.
And like you said, even though the government has a role to play, strong businesses also boost the economy, because then you are paying, good amounts in corporate tax, you are employing a good amount of people, you are helping the government reduce its imports by, increasing exports and stuff like that. So there's so many things that businesses can also do to contribute to the ecosystem. So we should stop looking inwards in terms of what our businesses can do and to look at the massive potential, and just to understand that the best legacy you can have as a businessman is that a business outgrows you and the business is bigger than you, as opposed to, I started it, it's my business, I can do whatever I want, I'm tired, I've shut it down, or I'm just doing it for my children to get something to eat. Once we understand these motivations and we try to expand that, I think business people can do a lot more for us.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, if you look at the rapid expansion of some of these Asian countries, they relied on their corporations being super competitive. So you look at South Korea, and companies like Samsung are competing on the international global stage, and it's because they have sound business practices backed by government support, which then prop them up, and they don't just serve the domestic markets now. They are at the frontier.
Look at Sino Hydro giving sovereign nations $2 billion in loans. So it should tell you that a good corporation can even outgrow government and, then go into other markets and then do wonderful things. It all starts from, like you mentioned, good corporate governance practices and ensuring that we're doing the best we can with the business.
Supporting them. Cool. I want to move to another side of corporations, which, in my opinion, is not talked about enough. Consumer protection.
Right.
There are instances where we see FDA raids into pharmacies, tabletops, selling, I don't want to mention brands over here, but selling something for power, and it's always waste power. I think it all comes down to waste power at the end of the day. But there is not a lot of consumer protection for Ghanaians. It's not quite clear when you pick up a product on the street whether it is fit for consumption or not. And this is not just a legal issue. This is having health issues which are abounding. What does the law say on consumer protection? How can the Ghanaian consumer be able to protect themselves from such corporations?
So, for a moral country, we have a booming sex economy. And so the best products that sell on the markets are those that promise either your ability to keep your husband or to get some boyfriend or to, and like you said, it's just symptomatic of the fact that we do not have a consumer protection law. Unfortunately, there's one that has been in Parliament since 2007 and has not left Parliament.
Wow.
Means we don't have the political will. For successive governments have come and gone, and there's not been any intentionality in terms of consumer protection. It's because we don't regard consumer protection as anything important. For instance, you go into a restaurant and you see something in your food. If you complain about it, you'll be like, hey, this guy, why? It's only in these posh restaurants that you should complain. They try to take steps about it. You buy wache from, the wache seller. There are stones inside. Yo, just remove it and go ahead and eat the food. So just generally culturally, we don't respect the consumer. When we make a product and the consumer has issues with the product, we don't care. And all even young people who sell items on Instagram and stuff like that, they will promise you one thing, you get it, and it's not what it is.
What I ordered versus
that's how it is, that type of thing. So, but it also as a result of a lack of regulation. We don't have a consumer protection law, and that causes a lot of problems. On the level of medicines and edibles, the FDA has a mandate under the Health Act to sort of offer those protections. And recently, the Supreme Court has said that the advertisement of, alcohol and certain drugs by celebrities, if you like, encourages people to buy those things, and so celebrities should not be banned. So FDA, banned celebrities from advertising those products, and the Supreme Court has held that particular ban. But then the challenge really is that it goes much more than just edibles and medicines. Just in every sphere of the products that we purchase, there has to be some form of protections that we guarantee to consumers. And if you look in the European Union and in the advanced countries, there's a deliberate, concerted effort to look at consumer protection. So you'd find that even recently, Apple was mandated by the EU to use Type-C chargers for all their phones, because all the EU phone manufacturers had gone to Type-C. So Apple was forced to conform. We don't see that type of power here, where corporations will be mandated to pursue a certain policy because it is beneficial to consumers. It's because, there's not that political will, and there's that cultural understanding that it's as if like you go into pubs, places of service, and somebody's offering you a service, but it's as if they are doing you a favor. That type of thing, And so that problem really goes back to the systemic problem that we have as Ghanaians. But I just need to make the point more forcefully that we need to look at the Consumer Protection Bill. We need to get it out of Parliament, and we need an agency that is responsible for ensuring that the consumers of products across the country are protected, and that when people have been sold things that are not fit for purpose, when people have acquired those goods, they have some remedy. So, for instance, I don't know if you've noticed, but an Energy Commission did this thing where they were certifying fridges, air conditioners, as fit for purpose. But the question is, when I have gone to purchase an air conditioner that has been verified by the Energy Commission as being fit for purpose, and it's not functional, what is the remedy that's available to me? That has not been provided for, and you don't have to go through the elaborate process of a court system before somebody can be held to account for something as basic as that. If we had an effective consumer protection regime in place, we would have been able to deal with a lot of these issues, and companies would begin to take us more seriously, and entities and business people would take us more seriously in terms of the products that they churn out for us. So the simple answer to that question is, we as young people will need to, whip up those sentiments again.
Why are we not? I was about to say, why are we not talking about this? Because, and I don't like to take a dig at anybody else, but the next thing we want to discuss is someone's sex tape or something of that. So why aren't we talking about this? Because this
it affects us every day. But I guess, again, it goes back to the awareness thing. We don't think that the state ought to regulate that. Not a lot of people know that the state has a duty to ensure that even as a consumer, if you are getting products on the market that you have voluntarily purchased, you still have some protections that exist. So because we don't have that understanding, I would give us some credit in that respect. But I'm hoping that, conversations such as this would draw attention to this very important issue, where people now understand that, look, when you've purchased something or you've gone for somebody to provide you a service, and the service is not fit for purpose, not up to standard, you don't just have to stand there and shout. There are remedies available to you, and there should be a consumer protection regime to ensure that when you have paid for something, you're getting quality in terms of what you've paid for. Only then will people now stop trying to, cut corners and, because again, like, I'll give you a classic example. I saw a post on LinkedIn where somebody went to buy a wachi, and the wachi was really good. And then the following day, when he went to buy a wachi, the wachi was horrible. Same, because we don't, sort of like hold these people to account. They treat their businesses anyhow, and sometimes you don't have an option, so you still go back to them and purchase it, and they just keep messing up with the products. And our remedy will be, okay, I'll stop buying from here. I won't go there again. I'll go somewhere else. That shouldn't be the thing. If people are selling you fake products, if people are not treating you right in terms of what you have paid for, you should be able to hold them to account.
One of the solutions you did mention was formalization, which I know sort of ties into the legal issue. There has been, is there some efforts to formalize some sectors of our economy just to boost consumer protection? And there has always been the claim that this level of formalization disenfranchises a lot of players within who are mostly the poor people.
The poor people, yeah.
Where do you stand on that? Is there some clarity on that situation? Is there like a misconception that it affects them? Because we are still seeing the same problems and we can't live with them forever.
So, I mean, fortunately, we are reaching a point of financial inclusion where now almost everybody has either a bank account or a mobile money account. I think over 90% of Ghanaians now have that, like who like adults have access to that. So that is of course a symptom, or that is symptomatic of the fact that sometimes formalization works.
Yeah.
We just need to be intentional about it, because the only way in which we can track these things is if we have a formalized economy.
Yes.
And so a formalized economy will then dovetail into things such as, when somebody has sold you this laptop and it's not fit for purpose, there's a system where we can track it. That will also come with education, really.
Yeah.
A formalized economy would only be possible if a good number of your people are educated. So maybe we need to be more intentional about educating the Ghanaian people.
Yeah.
And even those that are not educated, at least we need to be able to provide some form of education for them. Mm-hmm. So there are uneducated people who are able to use mobile money easily without any challenge, because there has been significant public education in respect of how to use it. So that's the same way in which we can approach some of the other things that we want to do in terms of formalizing the economy. Only then can we, gain the full benefits of what the states can do in terms of protecting consumers.
Wow. I do agree with you. I think my personal stance is that formalization can lead to immense benefits.
Yeah.
And every time it has happened, anytime there's a disruption in technology, people have been willing to accept it. But there's always been the resistance when there is an effort by governments to try and formalize. Then I don't know if it's from the bad perception of governments and how they do things terribly, or it's just people who oppose formalization because of the fear that they have of it. But anytime it occurs naturally, Uber boats,
people latch onto it, they jump onto it. Yeah,
people jump onto it. Cool. I want us to also discuss another institution which is super interesting and dicey, but the relationship between the church in Ghana, the church and the state in Ghana, would say is very, very close.
It's almost incestuous. Yeah.
Do you think we are brooding vipers in the bed? Because we've seen like tangible implications. For example, the $50 million hole which we spoke about, but countless examples where people are ripped off their savings.
Yeah.
People are just taken advantage of in droves. Mm-hmm. And this is a matter that you can't even speak about. Yeah. Probably people are even going to hear about this and feel like their people are being targeted.
Yeah.
But what is the law saying or doing about all these people, because they claim they have a religious right and go ahead and use it to abuse people and also take advantage of the custodial authority that they've been given in that regard?
Yeah, so one of the rights that the Constitution guarantees is your right to manifest your religion. Mm-hmm. But that right is, of course, subject to the general limitations and the general framework. So, for instance, you're not allowed to manifest your religion in a manner that is oppressive of somebody else's rights. And so you have instances, and I remember where I used to live a while ago. There was a church right behind my house, and they would do church service from Monday to Sunday. And every evening, the drama would drum very loudly, And I remember speaking about it once and, saying that I intended to make because it was a residential area, a formal complaint with the Environmental Protection Agency, Antichrist. I was branded Antichrist, that type of thing. So the challenge really is that, because, again, it goes back to the education, our uneducated, educated people, and politicians weaponizing religion.
Do you think it's something that we've just not seen? Are they doing it intentionally? Because they do.
Oh, they are doing it intentionally. I think they know we know, but they know we will not also do anything about it because many of us value the afterlife. And so, and you see, they have weaponized religion to the extent that now religious leaders are being used to spread that sort of message that, you don't question certain things.
Yeah.
So, for instance, and, people may have different opinions about the National Cathedral, but you'd see that sometimes when Christians want to criticize the building of that National Cathedral, they'll say, how are you criticizing a building that is supposed to be a place of God? You'd see instances where, some Muslims are criticizing the government supporting or providing some form of framework for the Hajj, pilgrimage. And people are saying, hey, why are you questioning something like that? So naturally, we have been conditioned to think that, especially when it comes to religion, like naturally we've been conditioned not to question things, but it's much, much worse when it comes to religion. And so politicians have taken advantage of that. That is why you see them in churches and mosques around the election period, just to show I'm more religious than the other person. Yeah. And, and because we are very, there's a lot of hypocrisy that exists, people are easily swayed by these type of things. Look, we need to get to a point as a country where we understand that the people should be allowed to manifest their religion. We would ensure that when they are manifesting their religion and are doing it within the bounds that's acceptable by law, they would not be prevented from doing so. For instance, when a Rastafarian wants to go to Achimota school and have Rasta, I see Achimota have been posting him of late recently.
Giving him congratulations.
And have Rasta, he should be allowed to go to school. That is so permissible. Shameful. But when we practice religion to the extent that it is detrimental to the nation state, then we have a challenge. We have a problem. And in my view, because of the influence that religious leaders have, they should be the first point of contact to even encourage us to question politicians.
Yes.
Because
not giving them their platforms.
No, not necessarily. Because the point is, religion has always been said to be the opium of the masses, and the most influential people we have in this country are religious leaders.
Yes.
And so imagine if we had a situation where religious leaders said, no, we don't want politicians to use our platform for their benefits. When it's time for harvest, they come and give 20,000 cedis, and everybody thinks, oh, this politician is a good man. But ensuring that their masses are sensitized about what is necessary for the growth and development of this country. It is when we divorce that, or we provide that divorce, that is when people can see that, yes, we are allowed to practice religion, yes, we are allowed to worship our God, but when politicians, even if he goes to my church, I remember, and you and I went to KNUST, there are instances where people would pick a running mate for instance simply on account of the fact that he attends a particular church, and people would vote for somebody just because, I go to the same church with him. No question about what he stands for, no question about what he represents and what his qualities are. And so we also need to understand that, yes, we go to church on Sunday to pray and stuff like that, but we also have to get to the business of governing.
Yes.
And the business of governing is divorced from the business of the church.
Yes.
And that when we try to marry them, then we have a problem. So many state organizations, you go every morning, they're doing morning devotion. By 10 a.m., somebody is forging a receipt. I'm like, so you just did morning devotion for what? By 10 a.m., somebody's forging a receipt. By 5 p.m., somebody's taking office supplies to their house. All round hypocrisy. But you go to private institutions where there's no morning devotion, but because there's a fear that if you take something, you'll be fired. So, to be honest, it's not that we fear God. That's the truth. Many people don't fear God because the type of things that they do, it doesn't demonstrate people that fear God. And so we must, understand that, yes, there's religion. Yes, there's God. Those who believe that, yes, of course. And those who profess the Christian faith, the Muslim faith, they're allowed to profess their faith. They should be allowed to do the same without any fear of attacks or anything of the sort. We should be a society that accommodates that. That is why when schools prevent, for instance, Muslims from praying, it makes me so outraged. But we must also not do these things or allow politicians take advantage of the control that religious leaders have to the detriment of the Ghanaian people. And so you'd, for instance, look at the nation states that religion developed from. The Anglican Church started in the UK, the Catholic Church in Italy, Rome, and stuff like that. But even in those instances, there's a certain departation. There's a separation between the church and the state. We cannot profess to be more religious than the Pope. We need to just be honest about certain things. So until we get to that point where we say religion is religion, we'll accept it, we'll allow people to profess their religion, but when we are running the business of the state, we'll get down to it and remove all religious.
Using narratives like this, he's anointed by
God. He's the one
to lead the nation. And things like when is a president, maybe he's sworn in and he's under an oath with God, so he's not supposed to be questioned amongst a number of things. If we are to flip this question, do you think it is the fear of the pulpit that also lets not politicians per se, but that lets the law not intervene with a lot of harmful religious practices? Because I do think all religious practices, in terms of if they are viewed as harmful or not, may be subjective to a degree. But there are some things.
So I don't know if you recall, a while ago, the IGP put out a circular and said, let's calm down on prophecies, especially 31st night prophecies and stuff like that. And he got a lot of backlash.
Yes.
The reason oftentimes the law has, and again, you have to remember that the law is in the hands of actors. And those actors will not act because, first of all, many of them are beholden to their religious leaders.
Yes.
So, I went to my papa and he prayed for me and I got this position. So there's no way, even if I think my papa is doing wrong, I'll do anything about it. And so there's not that incentive to call out harmful religious practices because there's a fear that, there will be implications. So for instance, if there's a large church, you're thinking about, the politician is always thinking about votes. So a church in Ghana has 1 million people. Even if they are doing something, their leader is doing something bad, I'm afraid I'll lose. They'll say I'm against the Christendom in Ghana, so I will not do it. And it's also because we as a people, we encourage that line of thinking.
Yes.
Because again, I can understand that my pastor is a man of God, but he's fallible as a human being. Yes. And so when he has done something that has, breached the law, he should be held to account the same way I will be held to account.
Yes.
And that's the fact that he's a pastor doesn't make him a better citizen than I am. Of course, we'll give him the reverence in the house of God, stuff like that. But outside those walls, and even in those walls, when he commits a crime, he should be held responsible. When he says things that are not acceptable, he should be held responsible. If we have that type of thinking, then those in the positions of power, or those who are mandated to enforce the provisions of the law, would not feel that, and when we get into those positions, because even as ordinary congregants, we questioned that particular instance, then we can also ensure that when we get into those positions to enforce the law, we are doing better. I'd also call on pastors and religious leaders to understand the unique position that they hold, to understand that they're in a position of influence. And I don't think it accords with any religious principle to use a position of influence to the detriment of the very people you have been put there to take care of or shepherd. And so I think it's also on them to understand sort of like the obligation that they have. The same way we think politicians should understand the obligations that they have, religious leaders should also understand that and not take, pleasures and do all sorts of things that are inimical to the nation state.
I think this is brilliant. This is the part that we need to cut out and let everyone know. Yeah. Because some of these things that we're discussing, the implications of are really structural and can change the way in which, like, the progress we are looking for is right here. And I think when you point out to the glaring corruption that is in our eyes that all of us keep silent over, you praying that it's your person that actually gets there one day so that you would also enjoy.
So I always say that nobody hates corruption in Ghana. They just want to be the ones doing it or benefiting from it. So everybody's prayer is, I'm just waiting for these people to come. When they come, then then it will be my turn. Yes.
The feeling that there's something which has been taken away from me so much that I need to regain it, and therefore, even if it comes at a cost to anybody else, I don't care. It's very, very dangerous. I think we've covered a lot of things, and unfortunately, time just won't allow us to go into the minute details. But I think definitely we will need to have a conversation like this again, and then be able to expand it. Because when you mentioned the issue around education and the Achimota guy, like the rampant disregard for codes, ethics, regulations, and laws within schools is alarming. Like, we come from KNUST where, for example, right now the state of student leadership is in disarray because the universities have used their powers to
clamp down
on some of them. And these are youthful voices. These are the same voices.
What are they learning? Yes. Exactly.
When they learn conformance, they come outside and they reflect it in their relationship with their corporations or employers, in their relationships with the state. So I think there's really a lot to discuss there. But my last question for you would be, for someone looking to start and looking to have this level of awareness, where do they begin? What's the starting point, and what should their journey look like? So
I think that, first of all, everybody should be a debater.
It's a good one.
No, but more importantly, I say not necessarily a debater as in engaged in the art of argumentation, because a lot of people think that's all that debaters do, or that's all that lawyers do. 90% of the work that debaters and lawyers do is to read and research, because you are only speaking for a short amount of time. But the preparation that goes into that is what is important. I think that, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, our educational system is tailored in the wrong direction, where the average Ghanaian is forced to think in a straight-jacketed manner. You don't expand your understanding of societal issues. And many of the people that are speaking up about issues that matter now is because they have exposure. And so they understand what is happening elsewhere. They have something to compare with and say, no, we can be better. This is not what life is supposed to look like. So I think generally as young people, we need to be more aware and more conscious. And the consciousness comes from reading and from exposure, not just reading anything, but things that are impactful. When we have the sense of what is happening elsewhere and are aware of how systems should work, that is what arms us with the knowledge required to challenge the way our systems work here. I think as a nation state, we have a structural problem and a cultural problem. And the only way we'll solve these two issues is if we have a mindset change. And just like the way in which you would have been tabula rasa, gone into school and then gained knowledge, until we take the steps to gain that knowledge, we'll not be able to change the mindset that we need to. So I think that for people watching this podcast, and for people that have friends, just constantly be moving in the direction of ensuring that as many people as you can are becoming more and more aware of the issues that matter to them, such that we get to a point in society where now our elections become an election of issues. Who has a plan? Who can change this nation? That is the only time where we can be proud and say that we've made enormous strides in terms of where we are going. I think that this generation, previous generations have failed Ghana. They admit it, absolutely. But I think that this generation cannot fail Ghana. This generation perhaps has had more exposure to the world, the outside world, than anybody else because of the internet. And so for the millennials and Gen Zers, we have an obligation to ensure that we are using the tools that we have, the knowledge that we've acquired, to change the status of our country so that 50 years from now, we will not have Erasmus Jr. and Telfer Jr. sitting here saying the same challenges that we have as a country. But yeah, I think that is where we start from. And also just being socially conscious and being aware and paying attention to the matters of governing. You think Ghana would not happen to you until it does. And you think that you are absolved of the problems that we have until it does. And then you'll be like, who would have thunk it? Or who would have thought it? It's a thing that we see in the office. So it's important to me personally. You don't necessarily have to be politically, involved in any of these parties and activities. But just be socially conscious. Be aware of what is happening around you. And be aware of the importance of your voice. Because that's the only thing that we have at the end of the day, our voice. But as a collective, we can shape this nation.
I think that's brilliant and worthy of the name, lawyer, lecturer, law lecturer. I think it's incredible. And the last part you talked about in terms of people finding their voice is so important to me because a lot of people now excuse that, I'm hungry, I need to look for what to eat. And not knowing that it is that same hunger which is being used to silence the voice, and it is that voice which, if they had allowed to come out, they'll perhaps not have stayed hungry. So I think this is a very, very insightful and powerful conversation. And one of the platforms that Joel spoke about is the Shafts podcast. And therefore, we're calling on all of you, please do subscribe to the podcast. Please do share our videos to all of your friends and do comment your thoughts under these specific issues. Are there any last words that you want to usually give the chance for people to advertise themselves?
No, so as a lawyer, I can't advertise myself. Yes, the etiquette of my profession prevents me from doing that. But I'm grateful for the opportunity, Erasmus. It's been a wonderful conversation. I just think that people should, listen to things like this. Very important topics that you and Andrews are discussing. And I'm very proud of you, Erasmus.
Thank you.
I knew you when you were Maui. You have to make that point again. So Erasmus was my first debate teammate. So we go a long way. And I'm very proud of how far this podcast is coming. I just want to say that I just want to give shout out to my team, Chelsea. That's causing me a lot of, heartache. And I've seen you've done a lot of talking about it on the on the podcast as well. But I'm just hoping that Maresca is the change that we're hoping for. And honestly, just to make the point that for our Ghanaian viewers, Ghana is going into another election. And I'm happy that this time, even though it's a contentious election, there are no sentiments around necessarily violence. Yes. And again, I'm an advert. I'm very particular, and I'm proud of our democracy. It is not where we need it to be, but it's better than what we would have in an autocracy. So I think that we as young people need to hold on to the principles and the values of democracy and do what we can to make it better. So December 7, I hope we all come out at the end of the day, and hopefully this nation will continue to go and see better days.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, yes, for staying with us all throughout this period. We'll see you in the next episode.